So committee, we're gonna spend the next 45 minutes or so getting some testimony on the Act 250 bill, page 926, including some fiscal information. We don't have everything that we really need, but we've got some that Diane has been working on for us, and Diane Snelling is maybe filling up a hole or two. And then we're going to switch to the emergency medical training bill. And then at 10:30 there's a joint assembly. I don't think it's going to be long, but I didn't schedule anything after that. If it's short, we may come back to Act 250 just for folks in the room who are interested after we get off the floor. So I just have to play it by ear because I don't know what the floor is going to be like. John, you were first. Please.
Great. Well, thank you for the opportunity to testify this morning. So just because although I could say I don't get this committee a lot, but I was here on water funding a lot. So.
You were here quite a lot
yeah,
on water.
So I guess that's not true anymore.
Yeah, everybody who was interested in water was here quite a lot.
That's right. Well, I think you'll find a lot of interest in this bill as well.
Yes.
But for the record, I'm John Groveman. I'm the Policy and Water Program Director for the Vermont Natural Resources Council. So I'm not going to speak, in any specific to the financial parts of the bill because I really think you need to hear from the NRB. And we'll, happy to comment once we kind of hear from them about sort of how the process works now, what it costs, what some of the changes are, and I'll speak just generally about it. But in emailing with Sorsha, my understanding is, my purpose of my testimony is kind of a comment on just the board commission change and from a policy point of view. So just my background relevant to this as I make these comments. So I worked on Act 250 since 1995. I was, at the beginning of my career, the Act 250 attorney for the Agency of Natural Resources. I represented A&R before all the district commissions, before the former environmental board. I was the director of the Water Resources Board in 2004 when the environmental board was eliminated and appeals went, they changed it from going to the E-board to the environmental court. So that's relevant because the water board also used to hear appeals and our authority. So I was in the middle of all those changes. So I had a front row seat for when those changes were made. That'll be relevant to testimony you hear about the structural change and the costs involved and the cost for the court and their role and all of that. And then at VNRC, we've represented a number of citizen groups in Act 250. VNRC itself has participated in many Act 250 proceedings, so I've been a participant from Act 250 from that point of view at the commission level and at the court. And finally, in the Snelling administration, I had the privilege of being the chair of the NRB. So I got to see from the seat that Diane Snelling has now just what it's like to administer the program, dealing with the budget, dealing with district commissions, getting people appointed to the commission, the resources that they need and all of that. So I just think it's important background because I don't know a lot about everything, but I know a fair amount about this, and so my opinions are informed by all that. So in front of House Natural Resources, there was a lot of testimony. I encourage you to go onto their website and you could click and to see the different points of view that were expressed about the current system. And so I'm going to testify today about the district commissions and the Natural Resources Board and the court system and how all that works. And even though there's disagreement in terms of how to improve the system, I think you'll find almost no disagreement that the current system is not working as well as it should, and some testimony that's really not working well at all. And from VNRC's perspective, we feel the current system really is just not. It's gotten to a point where really it needs some change. And what you have in H 926 is a proposal to address some of the problems that I'm going to just go over briefly.
So you're going to tell us in what ways it's not working.
I will.
That's my question.
But I just wanted to make the point. I think as you hear different views on the bill, there's going to be a common thread that the system is not working the way it needs to, and so something needs to be done. And so we think that this bill, it would improve the system. Others will disagree. But at the end of the day, I think hopefully you'll conclude that we do need to make some changes. So what's not working from our perspective in the current system? So, as I said, when I was NRB chair, I had the responsibility of district commissions need to be appointed. They're appointed by the governor right now. There are no qualifications for district commissioners. Anybody can be a district commissioner. It's completely up to the governor. I found, in trying to recruit people to be on the district commission, it wasn't easy. The district commissioners, we're asking them to do a lot. Act 250 reviews the largest development projects in the state. There are 10 criteria: technical criteria, environmental criteria, community impact criteria. If you add up all the sub-criteria, there's probably over 30 criteria in all. And it's a big task to review these projects and applications. I found it hard to find people to basically volunteer to do that work. It's a per diem, and you heard that yesterday. Right now it's a $50 per diem for attending hearings. And it was hard to get qualified people who had the time to really put into it, and that was a challenge. And I watched the commissions. Some of them are very strong and have people who've been on them for a while. Others, it was more turnover. It was really sort of a mix. And I would watch the commission struggle with some of the more complex applications. And so one of the goals of the change in the system in H926 is to basically provide some more resources for the board and for the commissions to do their work, especially on what are called major applications. Now, you heard a little bit about this yesterday in Act 250. These are terms of art. There are minor applications and there are major applications. Minor applications mean that there's no hearing held. That's usually because the impacts of the project are just not as potentially significant, and the interest in the project from neighbors and other parties is not that significant. But if a hearing is held, either because the district commission looks at a project and says, yeah, this one needs a hearing, or someone asks for a hearing, it becomes a major. 80% of all applications are minors, are processed as minors in Act 250. 20% are majors. And so it's the 20% that really, I think, challenge the commissioners and the volunteer, appointees that we have. And, we think what the bill does is it allows 2 of the commissioners to sit with 3 professional board members and have access to, and will be served by staff at the board to help them with the review of the applications. So that's a way that this H926 addresses that problem. The concerns that have been raised is that there are 2 commissioners and there's 3 board members, so the commissioners don't have, if they vote yes and the board members vote no, or vice versa, the commissioners won't be able to direct the decision anymore on a project. I don't think anyone knows how the voting is going to work. The bill does not say voting occurs in a block. The bill doesn't say all the board members have to vote one way, all the commissioners have to vote one way. The votes will be based on the evidence and the law, and as we all know, people will have opinions about the facts of the case and the law, and I don't know how it's going to shake out. So I just want to be clear about that it's certainly not preordained, and the idea isn't that for every single project, you're going to have 3 board members thinking one way. But so the idea is to bring those resources to bear. Another issue with the current system is that, so in 2004, when the Environmental Board was eliminated, we really set Act 250 on a course that has really, I think, not served the program well. Prior to 2004, you had the district commissions make decisions. Decisions were appealed to the Environmental Board. The Environmental Board then would render a decision. Their decisions were very clear. They were a mix of law and policy. Like I said, there are 33 criteria and sub-criteria. There's lots of policy questions to answer. And the board did a great job in their decision saying, this is what this criteria means, this is what that criteria means, this is how it works. It created clarity for the commissions, for the projects that didn't get appealed, on how to apply it, and it created clarity for the applicants and for citizen participants. Since 2004, with appeals going to the court, you have basically 3 entities, all with authority separate from each other, trying to create clarity on policy. So the district commissions, they do their review independently, There are lawyers at the NRB that could provide legal advice to the commissions, but it's up to the commissions to take that advice or not. So there's no sort of linkage between the board and the commissions. Even if the board is providing that advice, it is advice. I'm a lawyer. You know, lawyers give advice. People take advice. They don't take advice. That's their right. That's the role of a lawyer. But so it's up to the commission, has their opinion about something. If there's an appeal, the commissions are now out of the process, and the NRB is the party at the appeal. They could settle a case and reverse a commission decision. The commission has no say in it. And that has caused tension between the commissions and the board at times because people don't like decisions reversed. It's sort of what you see in towns with a select board as a party in a zoning case and could reverse what the DRB did. And sometimes that causes some hard feelings. And then if there's not a settlement, you'll have an actual appeal before the court. And the NRB could take position X, and the court doesn't have to listen. The court may do Y or A or B or C, and so you have these three different entities with their opinion about what activity policy should be: the commission, the board, and the court. And they're really just operating not in sync with each other, and it has created some tension in the system and lack of clarity. And so H926 addresses this by saying that these major applications will go to the board. The board, working with the commissioners, will set the policy, and there'll be much more clarity in the process in terms of what the decision making is. The third problem is just the appeal system itself. The appeal system, from our point of view, we participated in a number of appeals before the court. It's very expensive. It's very time consuming. And this is something that we wrestle with. There is a duplication to it. Right now, I've had several projects where you go to the district commission. If it's a big deal and there's going to be, it's really contested, you have to hire experts. You probably have to have a lawyer. It's going to cost tens of thousands of dollars to go to the commission. And then the way the system works, it's called a de novo review in court. You do it all over again in court, as if, what happened if the commission never happened. And that's even more expensive because you definitely have to have a lawyer if you want to be successful in court, and you have to deal with discovery, and you have to deal with all the court process that goes on. And we got to a point where what H926 does and what we support about it is if you have one fair process where you could go into the process. And if it is a big deal, if you know that it's contested and people are going to have witnesses and they're going to have lawyers, let's just have it out there in front of a board that has the district commissioners making decisions on the board, and basically get a decision, and those decisions would go to the Supreme Court. And that does cut out a step in the process, and that's something that I think applicants like, but it's something at the end of the day, we've spent a lot of money on the multi-tiered system, and it hasn't been working for the citizens that we've worked with and for DNRC. Lastly, I just want to make some points about the change that, and you'll hear differing opinions from other people, but this is our point of view, and I just want to put it out there. So people have said that the proposal will basically render the district commissions meaningless, and you could say, I think it's totally understandable to say that you don't want the district commission process changed, that you want the process the way it is today, that you want the sole decision making in the regions by the district commissions, and not have any input from a professional board, and have the 3 tiers of district commissions, some intermediate appellate level, and then go to the Supreme Court. That's a fair argument, and you'll hear that argument, but I don't think it's fair to say that there's not a meaningful role for the district commissions in this process. They'll process 80% of the application as minors, so 80% of what happens today won't change, and for the 20% there will be a change, and that's the policy issue that I think people have been debating, and it's a fair debate to have. But I don't, I think it's certainly rational to say that you could have one good, fair process with a combination of commissioners and these board makers making these decisions. But I don't think it's fair to say that the role for the commissioners is somehow a token role or not meaningful. I think an important part of the process, because the process is being streamlined, we were able to get agreement on a pre-application scoping process, something that VNRC and other groups have been fighting for decades, and we haven't been able to achieve because applicants have said the process is already too long. We've already got this 3 stages of review, and now you want us to do this pre-application review. Because we are going to have the what we think is fair process before the board, there's now agreement that we can have this pre-application scoping process where people could scope out issues. They don't need to bring lawyers. It's not even the formal process. I think that's a real benefit, and it's an indication of the bill is kind of this. It's got a support for ideas that have not been supported before because of that. I think a legitimate concern and something that we're concerned about is we don't want this new process to not be accessible to citizens, and it's been described as a PUC process, and people can make that argument, and there's some parallels between the PUC and this because it's a professional board, but from our point of view, this is going to be totally different jurisdiction than the PUC. PUC has really complicated rate cases having to do with our electric system and distribution and generation of power, and it's a very technical economic analysis, and as well as a reliability analysis in terms of energy issues. This is a land use panel that is going to have regional input. They're going to follow the criteria of Act 250. It's going to have very different authority and jurisdiction. There is language in the bill directing the board to try to facilitate citizen participation. I agree that those words need to come to life. I am concerned, and if this goes forward, I think that VNRC will work, and everyone needs to work to make sure that the implementation of the board is something that will work for citizens and applicants and everybody. But I'm not saying that that's not a concern. I think that's a legitimate issue, but it's a policy issue that we've been grappling with, and I hope that the committee just sees that that's what it is. It's a policy issue that we're trying to grapple with. We don't want the intent of the system that doesn't work for anybody, especially citizens. But so there's effort in the bill to address it. Is it enough? I think it is, but I think that's a legitimate question. I guess that's really all. That's kind of an overview on the money. All I'll say about the money part is that this needs to be funded properly, whatever that means. We're not running the system. That's going to be up to the new board, and we certainly will listen intently as this committee asks questions about what's needed to make this system work. Those are really important questions. We're not going to support something that doesn't have the resources to work. So I think that your work in this committee is really, this is an important part of the review process, and but we are, that's the standard for us. So we'll be listening and following the discussion to make sure that there's enough resources to fund the system.
Let me see if there's questions. Anyone on the committee has questions? Jim?
I have some, and I'll start by saying, first, morning, George, John Messi. My questions are sort of in the formative stage, kind of feeling my way through this discussion.
Yeah.
To acknowledge some of the things you said, 80% of the process will change, and that's the 20% that'll be different. 80% won't change, 20% will be different. But it's the 20% where real things happen, it seems to me, in an Act 250 application. One of my mentors in this process, way back when, said one of the mantras is get the planning up front. Figure out what you're going to do before you end up hammering tongs and spending a lot of money. And I don't see what I understand of the bill so far really encourages people to get the planning up front, to work things out with the adversaries before they end up before one board or another in NRB. So I'm hesitant to jump up and down and be in favor of what's being proposed at this point in time, largely for that. That's sort of my starting point.
Can I comment on that? Is that okay?
Sure.
So, I just think look at the scoping process. That's kind of the scoping pre-application scoping process I mentioned. I think we don't have that opportunity now. Right now, the process just starts, right?
Like, it can't happen. It's just
right. It's not required.
Not
this would
required.
institutionalize it.
Yeah.
And
Can you tell us more about the pre-application scoping process?
yeah, the idea. So what it requires is a 30-day. So before you file an application, at least 30 days before you file, you have to file like a pre-application with the town, and the regional commissions gets noticed.
Yep.
And then the regional commissions decide whether, at a minimum, and adjoining landowners, at a minimum, those parties get to comment on the application, so you get to say to the application, before it's like set, before it settles,
Yeah.
that like, here's our concerns, we're concerned about this, we're concerned about that. The idea is hopefully those issues will get addressed. The commission could hold a meeting, a public meeting. It's not a hearing, because it's not legal, which is good. So people don't need to bring their lawyers in or whatever. They could if they want to, or they're experts. There's an opportunity to ask questions and get, have the easel at the front of the room, people go through the project and get that input. And I think, as the chair is indicating, good applicants already do things like this, but it doesn't always happen, but it's certainly the best practice, and it would institutionalize that. So look at those provisions in the bill. It basically says what I just outlined. Could it be stronger and improved? Maybe, you should take a look at it. But the intent was to basically kind of institutionalize that sort of pre-work, as part of the process. Okay, thank you. So far.
Let me see if there's any other questions. We've got 2 or 3 other witnesses too, but we'll John, George.
Yeah, just a quickie, how much regional variation do you see now in the outcomes of these hearings? I mean, are there things which clearly would have passed in one district, regularly go down in another district? I mean, how much variation is there with this system?
I don't have like data and statistics on that. You should ask the NRB chair, because they're closer to it now. It's been a while since I've been the NRB chair, and I basically now focus on the projects that we follow. But certainly there are variations in process, and certainly there are issues that are a concern in some districts that don't get as much attention in other districts. And certainly, it's a double-edged sword of local review. I have experienced, there's strong feelings all different ways. Like, we were involved with the Walmart fights up in St. Albans, so I was working for an advocacy group that was concerned about it. There was a lot of community support for the Walmart, and that seeps into the zeitgeist of the hearing. I don't know how it affects the result, but you get the vibe when you walk in on day one that there's a lot of skepticism about the concerns that you're raising, just because of what's happening in the region and sort of what the public feeling is about a project. And so there's certainly that, and I felt that in everyone, and I think that's a human thing, right? And this wouldn't scrub that out of it, because you have the 2 commissioners, but I think one of the ideas, if you have 3 board members that are not from any particular region with the others, that it does neutralize some of that, and so the theory is you could get like a straighter up review. Not saying that anyone is being intentionally biased or unfair, but just being a human being, right? You're in the grocery store and people are saying, I really want Walmart, I really want Walmart. You can say, don't talk to me, I'm a decision maker. But I don't know, that has an effect. Does that, those are the type of things that I've seen. But I don't know, I haven't seen data, and I don't think this is necessarily a data-driven. I think the concerns that I raised were asking these volunteers basically to make these decisions, trying to find qualified people to have the time to serve, the fact that the court process is not, and the system isn't working. Those are the issues that we focused on more than inconsistency. But certainly what I just mentioned is something that we've seen and I think would be improved by this.
I'm going to move on. I know you're always
Yeah.
in the building. If we need to have you back,
Not
we can
always.
get you back. I'll be in the building.
I go home sometimes.
Mostly because I've got to shift gears. I've got
No,
somebody
I
coming
appreciate the time,
away from.
and I appreciate you allowing me to
Yeah,
go
no.
first. I do have another meeting too, so.
Yeah, okay, good.
But happy to come back and answer any questions.
Good, we'll get you back
Thank you.
if people have questions. So, Dan, can you do maybe, 5 minutes or so?
Yes.
And then we'll have Diane Snelling speak, and then we can always bring you back as well. I know you're around.
I'm always around.
Yeah.
Dan Dickerson from the Joint Fiscal Office. I put together a packet of information for you. It's about 4 pages that sort of attempts to give a big picture fiscal view of the Act 250 process, how the Natural Resources Board has been funded, how the ANR is funded for its efforts in the Act 250 process. So this first page is the one that I'll go through in some detail because it's a little heavy. So basically what I did is I created this chart. I wanted to give 5 full years of fiscal information, so 2015 to 2019. For some of this, you'll see shaded in 2020, and that just means that it's an incomplete year, so we don't have the whole picture there yet. And basically, these first 5 lines are base appropriations from the Act 250 permit fund, from the general fund going to the NRB and A&R for Act 250 review.
So explain what the permit fund is and so
Oh,
on. We probably know, but.
Sure. The Act 250 permit fund exists to receive revenues specifically from the Act 250 permit process. So there's a section in statute 10 VSA, I think 6083A, where all the different Act 250 fees are listed. All of those fees are remitted to the permit fund. As far as I can tell from going back to appropriations, the permit fund hasn't received any other revenues other than these permit fees. The Natural Resources Board also receives some general fund to fund its operations, and then as of FY 2016, there's an additional 75 cents per $1,000 of construction costs that goes to the permit fund, but then is passed on to A&R to fund its efforts. So A&R and Natural Resources Board both receive a little bit of funding from the Act 250 permit fund.
So is the A&R money ostensibly the money that to pay A&R for the cost of its participation in Act 250?
Yes.
That was my memory of it, but yeah, so it's not just random A&R stuff.
Yes.
Act 250 related.
So line 4 is just where I add up the 2 appropriations from the permit fund to A&R and NRB, and then line 5 is just all appropriations.
So that would be like our total cost of Act 250 state costs, is that kind of what that numbers?
Line 5 would be the total state cost, so that's general fund included, and then the permit fund. Line 4 is just the permit fund.
So if the question was asked, how much state money goes into Act 250 now, it would be this line?
Formally, yes. I think A&R would state that there's additional effort that goes into the process that they're not compensated for currently. I think that's part of why this bill back provision exists in H926.
Right.
But yes, formally this is the general fund and the Act 250 permit fund.
Which line?
Line 5 is the total. That's general fund and permit fund. Line 4 is just the permit fund.
And line 3 is the general fund.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So moving on, line 6. These are the revenues that have been collected by the Natural Resources Board and A&R and remitted to the Act 250 permit fund. So I got this out of the Vision system, which is sort of the statewide accounting system. It doesn't separate what A&R or what's attributable to A&R and what's attributable to the Natural Resources Board. It's all just one fund. So you'll see that there are 3 sort of solid years, and then there's this big dip in 2018, and then it sort of creeps back up in 2019. As far as 2020, it looks like it's going to be back towards where it was in 2015 through 2017. I looked for 2017 through 2019. I looked at where those years were as of February 20th, and 2020 is above all of those. So I think it's going to be a strong financial year, but things could change. So I just wanted to say that's where I think it's trending. And then line 7 through 11 are the expenses incurred by the Natural Resources Board and A&R to administer Act 250. And so much like line 4 and 5, 10 and 11 is just the total of, line 10 is the total of Act 250 permit fund expenses, line 11 is permit fund and general fund. And so the line 12 and 13 I think is where the story is, and where there are a couple of charts that I created that sort of further illustrate that. But line 12 is just, where was the permit fund when you take in the revenues and then you subtract expenses, and you'll see that as of 2017 things were fine, and then 2018 and 2019 it's sort of nosedived, and it looks like it's going to come back this year. I think, you know, I would recommend that you question the chair of the Natural Resource Board on how, you know, she feels the year is going to end up, but it looks like it's going to be a little bit better than the previous 2 years. And then line 13 is just where was the Act 250 permit fund, where was the Act 250 permit fund balance at the end of these years? And so I gave 2014 in this instance, and you'll see at the end of FY19 it was in a deficit. You know, given that expenses continue creeping up and revenues, you know, even if they go back to where they were in 2017, I think it's going to be hard to bring that back into a positive balance. But it could happen if the year ends really strong. But it's, you know, to me it looks like probably it's going to be close to zero or a negative deficit. So that would be 2, you know, consecutive years of that.
Yeah.
It's just something to be aware of.
Quick
So-
question.
Yes.
Thanks. I understand the general fund appropriation in line 3. I don't understand the general fund expense in line 9. What?
So, you know, the appropriation is basically it's spending authority, and so, you know, what your spending authority isn't necessarily going to match what your expenses are.
Okay.
So, you know, it's just they have authority to spend up to this amount from the general
And that's how much
fund.
they actually spend.
Right, and then the expenses are how much they actually
Okay,
spend.
thank you.
And so moving on to these 2 graphs.
Looks like pretty much every penny that was available,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Almost, sometimes.
Well,
Which
yeah,
makes
I
sense
mean-
if you're running a deficit.
Yeah, if you're
Sure.
getting a little bit of general fund, you don't want to risk losing that.
Exactly.
I would imagine.
Yeah.
So the 2 charts are just illustrations of basically what you see in lines 12 and 13 of the first chart. So this chart 1 is basically showing, you know, what the blue line is what the revenues were going to the permit fund for a 6-year period. Obviously 2020 isn't complete yet. And then the shaded areas, the big shaded areas is the permit fund revenue attributable to the Natural Resources Board. The other shaded area is what A&R gets of that. You know, as of 2017, things were good. There's been a dip in 2018 and to a lesser extent 2019. In 2020, it looks like it's going to be close. And then the second chart is basically just showing the end of year balance of the fund and how it really sort of plummets as of 2017 to the end of 2019, and I don't know that it's going to be at a positive balance at the end of 20 either. And then finally, at the request of Representative Donovan, I have a nice sheet that outlines each of the individual Act 250 fees. There's a big blank spot in the middle, and that's where I'm waiting for the Natural Resources Board to give me you know, how much revenue is attributable to each fee, although I do list the totals at the bottom. So hopefully what they give me adds up to those totals. But, you know, I would, they said that they could give me 3 years worth of information, so I'll be excited to receive that when it comes. But my understanding is the first 2 fees are really I guess what you would call the
Where
money
money
makers
is,
for
yeah.
the Natural Resources Board. And H926, as it's currently, or as introduced, I guess, would increase the fee in line 1 from $665 to $965, and then the fee in, I believe, line 6 from 2 cents per cubic yard to, I think, 3 cents per cubic yard.
Right, but it doesn't increase that second one, the construction, the fee for the
Right.
construction costs over 15 million.
Right. One concern I do want to raise, I look back at, you know, the last 2 times that those fees were increased, and in the 2015 session, there was an increase in a lot of the fees going into FY16 that, you know, when the Natural Resources Board sort of gave us what they thought the revenue was going to be, it was about $600,000, and, you know, you can look back at FY16 compared to 15 and it doesn't look like it was close to that. So I don't know if that's just because the permit activity dropped that much, or if it's because, you know, the revenue estimates were off, but it was the same thing back in 2010 going into FY11. the fees were not raised as much. I think they had estimated 200,000, but once again, from year to year, it wasn't really close to that. And so I would, given that we only have 3 years information, I would be, I'd be very careful, very conservative on what we estimate any new revenue would be if we continue to contemplate raising the fees as they're stated in H 926, just given the history. That's all I have.
Important point. I remember raising them in 2015, and looking at the chart, it clearly just didn't generate the money. And there's nothing, it depends on what people are building and how
Right.
expensive it is. It's not something that we can, not surprising it didn't work in 2010. A little more surprising in 2015, but concerning. So, all right. Questions for Dan? Nicely done. Quick. Thank you.
Thanks.
Diane, Snelling, thank you for doing it.
Good morning. For the record, Diane Snelling, Chair of the Natural Resources Board, and glad to be here.
Yeah.
And thank you to Dan. I brought some sort of information, to the best of our ability. We have been trying to provide House Natural Resources with information as the bill was changing. So we have a number of different calculations at different times, which I think Dan's information is much more useful to you right now.
And we saw I think there were a couple memos that you had provided
Yes.
the Natural Resources Committee, which we looked at yesterday.
Okay.
And then we asked Dan to do stuff in the format that we're used to.
Right.
Which is what he's been working on.
So I just need you to know that in some of the information you're looking at is not inclusive as the bill exists now. So, for example, there was a actual chart-like document, I don't know if that's what you looked at yesterday or not, but in that, that was put together before there was the proposal to have the same hourly rate for the regional representatives when they're serving as the professional board members. So we haven't had a chance to calculate that.
That would be on the budget side, but yeah, on the spending side.
Yes,
Right.
yes, but I'm just saying
Yeah.
it's hard to estimate how that would come together. So I feel like I don't really have enough time to tell you how Act 250 works. So I did bring brochures and our most recent annual report, which has a lot of documentation of the fact that 72% of our permit applications are issued within 60 days or less. And I think that is in contrast to what many people think about Act 250. And then you have, and that is primarily administrative amendments and minor applications. And then you have the other 20% of majors. So what I mostly want to leave you with is that the Act 47 Commission started in 2017, and the House Natural Resources Committee has just voted and come up with this Bill 926, and I hope you will acknowledge that they've spent almost 4 years trying to come up with this proposal, and I would say I strongly support the idea of a professional board for lots of reasons, but primarily because this whole investigation into Act 250 was, how do we get ready for the future? What is it we're not doing now that we should be doing in order to be ready for the kinds of development, the kinds of climate change, all the things that are going to be happening in the not too distant and the more distant future. So what a professional board does, in my opinion, is it finally puts in place a much broader, bigger picture of what development is happening in the state, together with the cumulative impacts of smaller projects. And there is no place right now for that to happen. So to me, that's very essential to moving forward in terms of how we're going to plan land use and how we're going to plan to keep the environment clean as we promote development. And I say that because we're constantly being told we're a block to development, and I just want to say, I don't really think that's true. But, okay, we could debate that. But the fact of the matter is that a professional board would really make a substantial difference in terms of how we could and would produce decisions that I think would have a much stronger impact on how development happens in the future. So if you would like these, I can pass them out. I can give them to your assistant. I will send annual reports this direction. I didn't mean to. It's just right there. And I'm happy to try to provide any other information I can. I would just make a note that people do tell us at this time that the fees are too much. And so I'm very wary of trying to raise fees as a way to pay for this structure. And it would be fabulous if we could identify dollars in general fund. As a member for 14 years in appropriations, however, I do know that that's not easy.
Let me see if there's some questions. I've got one. Question for
I just missed one thing that you said. What percentage of, or 72% of permits are issued in what time frame?
In 60 days or less.
Thanks.
So the question I've got has to do with if we were to increase fees along the lines of what the House Natural Resources recommended. Can you respond to sort of Dan's question about, are we really going to raise that much money from increasing the fees? I don't know if you were chair in 2015 when we
No, I
last did
became
it.
chair in March of 16, so
Okay.
that will be my 4th anniversary as chair of the board.
Right.
And,
But you certainly were there when the fees didn't materialize.
right.
So that was-
And you know, I will tell you quite honestly, we're penny pinchers. We really are. We consistently spend less than we're allocated, and that's on purpose. We're really trying to hold down those expenses. On the other hand, there is no way we can predict year to year what's going to happen. We've tried charting it all a variety of different ways. It gives us really no way of guessing what the revenues will be. So that's very tricky.
So I guess, rephrase the question, if we were to pass the bill as it is, and we'd be counting on $600 and some thousand from this increase, would you feel confident we're gonna get it? Or
Well,
would you be worried?
I'm sort of worried all the time,
Yeah,
Madam
okay.
Chair.
That's probably good, yeah.
And I don't know how to really answer your question, because those estimates are based on the projects we've had in the past. So trying to go from the reality of the projects we've had in the past to what we may have in the future, it's very hard to determine that. But certainly, you know, and I think to some extent that's why I say right now we rely on a very small amount of general fund, and I think it's quite amazing in many ways that for a staff of 25 people and an overall budget of somewhere around $3 million, that we administrate this program throughout the state that covers over $600 million worth of development and has such a substantial impact on the state. So I probably haven't answered your question yet.
No, it's okay. I mean, eventually, we would get an estimate from Joint Fiscal, and their estimate may be higher or lower than the 600 that we have in there.
But one of the things we
But
do
I'm just
struggle
curious.
with is having the data to support, and I don't know if any of you recall that I was very engaged in the concept of we need data to show the results of the kind of work. You know, if we give money to this, what are the results of those dollars spent in government? And so I have really been pushing for better data. We're unfortunately not quite there, and some of it is based on the fact that we have 9 district commissions and 5 district offices, and we've worked very hard to get consistent input of data so that we can get the data that Dan would like to work with, and now we're having to do it in a fairly manual way as opposed to you know, regularly being able to print the reports that would give us that data, but we are getting there.
see if there's any other questions, Robin and Joy.
Yeah, regarding the district
Scott?
commissions,
Yeah.
we're hearing about some of the challenges. How many people are on each district commission and how many vacancies are there?
That-
I'm seeing this with has district coordinators, but aren't there other people that
In the
are on the
annual
commission?
report, it's a listing of all the commissioners and chairs of the commissions
okay.
for 2019. And what you see is every commission should have a chair and 2 members,
Okay.
and then up to 4 alternates.
Okay.
And there's a variety in different commissions, different districts, of whether they're complete commissions or not.
Does everybody at least have the 3?
I would say yes.
Okay, thank you.
Joy. Diane, I just was wondering, the Natural Resources Board is made up of all Chittenden County residents except for 1. Does that pose a problem as you're looking at statewide?
Well, right now, the board has no specific task other than the administration of Act 250, and they delegate that to me as the full-time chair. So I'm very neutral about place in terms of it is the entire state that we are responsible for. So I have not found any sort of Chittenden-centric results, if that's.
Is one of your jobs to recruit commission members?
No,
You
we
don't do that.
do not have any role in that. The governor appoints them.
And how do the names go to the governor's office? How does that happen?
He has a express your interest webpage, and people apply to that, and then I guess that they are reviewed.
Okay. Scott?
Diane, one is regarding this professional board. As I'm sure you're aware, there are some people that are worried about the lack of local control over some of these projects, major projects. And I've kind of thrown the idea out there of, on that board of 5, 2 district commissioners and 3 paid, that majority vote, but at least the vote of at least one of the district commissioners on the board, on that, of the 5 would have to vote yes to approve the project. What are your thoughts on that type of modification to the?
I would strongly recommend against it, Representative, because people are supposed to make their decisions based on evidence, not on opinion. And I think the presumption that this person, because they're from this place, would vote in a certain way is not about basing something on evidence. So when you're presented with an application, you're supposed to be looking at what is what's presented in that commission hearing, and not on what you feel about your local area. Although I think it's very important that we're carrying forward the local representation in this new construct. But I do think what we're gaining is more of a statewide perspective together with that local perspective. So for 50 years, we've had just a local view spread out over 9 districts. And now what we're trying to do is add a way of looking at the entire state, both local and more statewide. And so I would give it an opportunity to work and see how the votes turn out. Because I would not predict to you that the local representatives would necessarily vote differently than the 3 professional members.
Do we have a problem with local district commissioners not voting on evidence right now?
On occasion, sure. It takes a lot of training. It takes really reminding people, this is not about your opinion, it's about the evidence. And that's, I mean, you all sit in a place where opinion is freely expressed, but you also sit in review of projects that are about evidence. So I think, you know, to me, that's the balance. I'd like to see how it works, and what kind of opinions get.
Jim and Peter. And then we'll
Yeah.
have to
Yeah.
switch gears because we've
Okay.
got people on a different subject.
I
Phrase
can
that
come
I-
back later, Madam
We'd love to
Chair.
have you back, but so
Phrase
let's
that I
see
was
if we'll
gonna
be back here.
use, Diane, escapes me right at the moment. But, on a transition from what we have now
Mhm.
to a statewide perspective, I would
Right.
say, which is sort of what you were saying.
Together with the local.
Yeah, together with
It's not
the
one or
local.
the other.
But didn't we have that when we had the Natural Resources Board? I mean,
Yes.
you know,
Environmental board.
the
Yes.
Environmental Board, I mean, we had that.
Yes.
So we did away with that,
Yeah.
which was sensible in my opinion, and now
Okay.
we're
Well, the idea, I think, at that time was that it would make things clearer to have them go to the court. I think people, after experiencing how it is,
Yeah.
are thinking maybe you need a different approach.
Well, but as John Groveman said, we used to, I would say, be able to charge the process, and it seemed to make sense. And then we ended up with the situation we have now, with there are three bosses. They go to the Supreme Court. I mean, you have three sets of opinions, where none of them necessarily take precedence. You have
Well-
the district commission who has a role. We have the applicant. We have the and I forget the terms he used, but he was pretty clear. I'm not sure if our mid-course correction might get us further off course. It's a shorter way.
So please try to think of it as, actually you have 9 different boards, okay?
Yeah.
Because you have the 3 professional members with 2 from each of the 9 districts.
Yeah.
So it's not just ever the 3, it's always
Okay.
5.
I wasn't being clear. I'm not
Okay.
but thank
I
you.
don't-
But I understand what you're saying. I just didn't articulate what I was trying to say. So.
You wanna try it again?
No.
You've got a minute?
Um,
No?
You can ask again later.
Well,
It's okay.
Peter has a question, and then maybe I'll be able to.
Maybe it'll come
formulate
back to you,
a little
Peter.
better, you know?
You mentioned the advantages of the current proposal in respect to the effects of, in your phrase, cumulative development. And I'm curious, could you help me out? Where in the rearranged structure and progression of an application would you think the cumulative effects of development would be more adequately handled than in the current situation, or back in 2003 for that matter?
Well, you will have a group in this proposal who is constantly informed by the local district where the project is happening. And so they have a view of what those impacts are. When I'm saying cumulative impacts, I'm meaning both ones that go through Act 250 and those that don't. So there's a lot of things that don't trigger Act 250, but they also have an impact. So trying to have a much bigger picture and maintaining the view from the local district, which is informed by all of the community's interests and specifics, you know, whether it's slate quarries or other types of industry that are particular to that district. So you would have both. Can I answer your
It sounds like they would look at what is called in other circumstances carrying capacity, but I don't see that in the proposal or the criteria.
Well, I think it's more in the structure right now. You know, for me, that structure itself will contribute to that, and I agree, I think there needs to be more details added on how that occurs. But you can't have any of that without this structure, so.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Ah, thank you. Is Jamie Fan in here and Drew Hazelton, is Drew Hazelton here?
She might be in the hallway.
Are they in the hallway? So we've got 2 more witnesses scheduled, but I've got people scheduled in at 9:45 on a different bill. At least one of them is from outside the building. I think what I'd like to do, if it's okay with the committee, is shift to our other subject, which is the emergency medical personnel training. And if we have a minute, we'll go back to this, so if people don't mind